Okay, this is the video for Module 3, and moving right along in history, you're reading Chapter 3 of the Spring Book, and in Chapter 3, he goes into some of the ideas that, were around at the beginning of the new nation, of the new United States, and, how government was going to address, how society was going to address education. He talks a little bit about Noah Webster, Thomas Jefferson, some of the ideas of the early, philosophers and politicians and so forth, and what their feelings were about education. But I think what you'll find is that, some of the, well, and we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the class with the goals of education and, the founding fathers and what they believed. And, and some of the ideas are kind of interesting, and I think we have some of those ideas still within our public schools, but I think you will find that some of these ideas are a little more antiquated than perhaps we may have imagined. But anyway, it's an interesting chapter, and he talks about some faculty psychology, which is, not accepted psychology today, but it's interesting to believe that or to understand that they believed that if you exercise the brain, just like you exercise a muscle, you had to, there were different areas of the brain. And I mean, some of this is true, but just on a very different, in a different way than the way that they believed about faculty psychology. So that kind of guided education, that belief guided education for a while, and that's where you get rote memorization and drill and kill type exercises, because those were the types of things they believed that truly helped your brain, do better. Anyway, so there's some things about how the college evolves, and I think I asked you a question on the quiz about the Dartmouth case, which is, kind of an interesting case for history geeks like me, but it was, important because it did set a certain precedent. Anyway, review the PowerPoint also that I gave you. It's a very short PowerPoint, just pulling out some of the main ideas for Chapter 3. Okay, and then in Ravitch, you're supposed to read Chapters 7, 8, and 9. Chapter 7 was about, international test scores. International test scores, yes. These are very interesting. And another person who writes extensively about these test scores as well, is Linda Darling Hammond. And I shared with you a very brief article of hers. I actually used to require one of her books in my class, in this class. Her writing is not quite as engaging, I guess I would say, as Ravitch. It's a little more tedious to read, but she makes a lot of very, very good points, and she's a well-respected scholar. She's at Stanford. She was Obama's original Department of Education secretary nominee, and got dropped right at the last minute, and then Arne Duncan was taken up, so there's some politics there. But anyway, she has some very interesting perspectives about these international test scores, what other countries like Finland, like South Carolina, listen to me, South Korea, Singapore, I think she mentions Hong Kong, some of these other places that used to have very poor school systems are now have very successful school systems. So she talks a little bit about that in her article, and I think it is very interesting. And keep in mind, one of the reasons that we have a lot of the reforms that we have today, that a lot of the corporate reformers, one of the reasons they're trying to change so much within education is these perceived poor rankings on these, international league tables, so to speak. So it is important to understand them, and to understand that, we are a democratic country, and that we educate everybody, or at least we try to educate everybody. We don't have a special top 15% of our population that is allowed to go to school and allowed to then take these tests, like China, let's say, which China wasn't even tested as a whole country. They tested the very elite city, Shanghai. And if you've only got the top 15% of your population taking the test to begin with, you've already, creamed the crop, so to speak. So anyway, there's some interesting information in that article. Please read it. And I guess, oh, and Ravitch will also talk about high school and college graduation rates. I found those chapters in particular to be very interesting. I think we hear a lot about the, terrible graduation rates here in the United States. And I'm not saying that they're perfect, but, and even Linda Darling Hammond contradicts really what Ravitch says in her article, because she says, well, we have a 70%, or she uses, fuzzy language. We have about a 70% high school graduation rate. Well, Ravitch will talk about that, and she'll explain that the rate could be seen as higher if we were to actually figure in, other populations of students who take GEDs, students who graduate a year later, that it may not be as bad as it seems. But anyway, so you'll respond to the discussion prompt, and you'll take the quiz. And again, you can use all of your resources to take the quiz. You can have your book open. You can have the PowerPoints available. Please do, as a matter of fact. The quiz is really, for me, hopefully it's a way it's also a learning process, so that you can learn, oh, okay, this is something that was important from this chapter. It's not me trying to come up with something, to try and trip you up or something like that. I'm really trying to make sure that you got the important points from each of the readings in each of the chapters in the books. So I guess that's it for now, and I will see you in Module 4.